All right, guys, now we're going to get into the cranking series. We make 3 7.2s, a 7.2 medium, a 7.2 medium heavy, and a 7.2 heavy. We make a 7.8 medium heavy. We make a 7.10 medium heavy. Again, this is applicable across the board. It does not matter what series. They all have the same exact actions. The 7.2s, as you can see, here's a 7.2 medium, and I got a little Spro on it. I was throwing this on Cherokee Lake. I haven't touched it since then. Great rod for that 8-pound and 10-pound line, the smaller crankbaits. A lot of the guys here in Florida like to throw the rattle traps. I got guys that 6-7 of these rods in their boat. They say, I just don't lose fish with the smaller hooks on those big fish because the rod really does give. I personally like it if I'm fishing little secondary point stuff like that around the rocks. The smaller crankbaits, the Spros, the DT6s, things like that. It's a great rod all around for that kind of fishing. The 7.2 medium heavy rod here, 1.5s, again, you know, it's a little faster tip, a lot more backbone in the area. This rod here is our #1 selling rod on the crankbait series. A lot of guys like to throw the smaller chatterbaits. They're 1.5s or DT8s, 6s, series 5s, stuff like that on that rod. That's about what I do with it. It's a great rod for those medium-sized crankbaits. The 7.2 heavy, again, this rod here is my personal favorite for 1.5s, 2.5s, big chatterbaits, even some of the swim bait stuff around the hydrilla where I need to give a little to those fish. Very fast, very powerful rod. You know, each one of these rods is designed with a specific purpose. They're not just randomly designed. Aaron does not fish that way, and he's had, you know, almost all the input on these rods. I asked him why we needed this heavy, and he said, listen, it's a cold water crankbait rod. Basically, when you're fishing at 1.5 or 2.5 around heavy cover, trees and riprap stuff, and you're throwing 15, 17, or 20, you got bigger hooks that you got to drive through those fish. The water's colder, their mouths is harder during the winter months, and you want to be able to jack that fish and muscle them out of that cover with a shorter rod because you're still making those accurate throws around the brush or even down the edge of a riprap. Even though they're longer throws, you still got to be accurate with it, but you got to have the meat to pull them fish out. We're going to get into some of the longer rods here. The 7.8 and the 7.10. I don't even have 7.10, sold out of those. The 7.8 is the perfect 6XD and 5XD rod. You can throw that thing a country mile on this rod. You know, when I first asked Aaron about the crankbait rod, I said the cold water. He also wanted a hot water rod. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, the hot water rod, you know, you're throwing an 8, 10-pound line, you're throwing 100-foot throws, 130-foot throws. Fish are, you know, they're mushing the bait. They're not attacking it like they did around brush and stuff like that. So you want a rod that's a little bit more limber, a little bit softer, more parabolic. So this rod is, you know, the ideal rod for that. A lot of the guys here in Florida use this for the open water rattle traps. Same thing, they just don't lose them. As a matter of fact, Bradley Dortch just won the FLW Tour event on Lake Harris using a 7.10 and the rattle trap with 15. And he says once you get them hooked, they just don't come off. And that's a beautiful thing. And it all has to do with the design and the action of the rod. So the 7.8 again, guys, is for that Series 5, Series 6, and possibly a Series 8. I stepped that up to the 7.10. That's a personal preference. The 7.10 is your perfect 8XD and up to 1-ounce swim baits, 10XD rod. I personally don't throw the 10XD on it. High as I go is that 8XD on it. I'll show you what I throw my 10XD on here in just a second.